Last week we talked about vulnerability. And I think the thing about vulnerability is we're open. We're available. We allow people in. We allow our emotions out. We allow ourselves to be seen. When we have our masks on, when we have all these walls of protection, we're not very open for new life. We don't allow change to happen. So growth and change are really the same thing. And so the topic today is, do you want to change? Do you really want to change? And for me, even just saying yes to that is a place of vulnerability. Because if we say we want to change, that means that we don't have it all together, that there's places in our life that we want to grow. And we can all say that, yes, we're for growth and we want to change, but to be willing to change, to have that openness and saying, I don't know. I don't know how to change. That can be a vulnerable place. We're not operating from I know everything. You know, we feel a lot stronger when we come in and we can say, well, this is what's true, and I have all these points, and I have it all put together. It's a lot scarier to say, I don't know. So just the willingness to say, I want to change, is a place of vulnerability. The question is do we really want to change? And because... And why I add the really is because what I find is people do want to change often, but then change it is actually fairly difficult. We can have temporary change. We can do it short term. We can do the sprint. But we have a marathon going over there. And change really is about a marathon. It's about showing up over and over and over again. And that's when we start to realize, do I really want to change? And I think one of the ways we do that is by staying in touch with that vulnerability. Sometimes when we're vulnerable, we have that moment of vulnerability and we connect with somebody else maybe in that vulnerability. We connect with the divine in that vulnerability. We connect with ourselves. But then we shut down because we go back to life and like, well, everything's basically okay. I don't really need to change. Sometimes I think the 12-step program, my sense with the 12-step program is that you get to a place of powerlessness. You get to a place where you're brought to your knees. And that first step of the 12 steps is I am powerless. And I think that is reiterated over and over, not to reiterate that we're a victim, but to reiterate our vulnerability, to stay in touch with that vulnerability, because if we don't stay in touch with our vulnerability, we're not going to stay in touch with our willingness to grow. We're going to just say, okay, I was powerless for them, but I'm pretty good. I know enough to get along. I know enough to keep things basically as they are. I may not like it, but I'm not going to stay in that uncomfortable zone very long. But if you have the number one principle in your, and I'm not in 12 steps, I'm just, you can tell me later if I'm wrong. And who's doing 12 steps? There's a whole, it's 12 steps is very alive right now on the minister's listserv, which is why it's on my mind, of combining 12 steps and what we do. The idea that we are sort of keeping our vulnerability always in the forefront of our mind. So as I was researching last week vulnerability, I popped onto a YouTube of someone I've never heard of. Has anyone heard of Mel Robbins before? I'll see, I'm not the only one. Apparently she's a best-selling author. She was a lawyer, and now she talks a lot about change. And why you're going through YouTubes and it said, how we screw up ourselves or something. I said, I don't want to see that. Of course. And pick the right titles. But she said two things that really stuck with me, so I wanted to talk about them this week in terms of change. The first thing that she said, I actually caught her halfway through the talk, so I don't know what she said. What she said before that was okay, but I caught it right at the right time, because she said, you know what? You're never going to feel like it. The reason why people don't change is you're just never going to feel like that. And of course that's wrong. We feel like it sometimes. We feel it a little bit, which is why we start the change. But are we going to feel like it constantly over and over to really be willing to do the work necessary? And then the other thing she said is it takes will. It takes some force to change. It's not going to just change naturally. It's not going to change in this nice, easy, I'm always comfortable. You're going to get uncomfortable, which is why we stop. She said we have this button in our head, which is automatic pilot, and then stop if it starts getting uncomfortable. So as soon as it starts getting uncomfortable, she said we pull that emergency brake and say, stop! I'm not willing to change anymore because it's getting uncomfortable. And she said that's where you need the force, a little bit of energy pushing you to do it when you don't feel like it. And so I loved her. She asked the people in the audience, she said, if you want to feel what that's like, tomorrow morning, wake up a half an hour before you normally do. Put your alarm for half an hour, and when that alarm goes off, don't press snooze or don't lie in bed. Just get right out of bed. Half an hour before when you normally do. Just pop right out of bed. And she said, what you're going to come face to face with is your resistance to change. That you will feel a physical, like, oh, I have to do this. And that's what we have to sometimes push through. So what she was saying is that for change, we have the ideas often. We don't lack in the ideas of how we want to change, especially when we're vulnerable. That's when we start to really open up and we start saying, oh, we could do this. This happens all the time. I hear this all the time. And when people start thinking about things that they can do, but they don't follow through, because that's when it starts to get difficult and requires force. And I don't like the word force, but I like the word action. It requires a consistent action, especially when we don't feel like it. So we have the idea, but then we have to have an action that follows. We say treat and move your feet in our teaching. You do a treatment, yes, we change our thinking, change our lives, but our lives will not change if after we've done our treatment, after we've done our prayer work, we don't go out and act in alignment with what we just spoke our truth to be. If we just speak our word and we keep our behaviors the same, nothing's going to change. Then there was another person, his name is Robert Greene. He wrote a book called 48 Laws of Power. Has anyone heard of that book? Apparently another bestseller that we've never heard of. Okay. That's how they sell these guys. They're all bestsellers, apparently. I don't know. I don't know what's my book. So anyways, his name is Robert Greene. He was actually very fascinating. He, not that she wasn't, but she was sort of the high inspiration, big speaker, and he's much more calmer. And he was saying, the biggest problem we have with change is that we look at it from what we see out there. So when someone tells their great change story, oh, this big event happened to me, we go, oh, look, they had that great opportunity, or look, aren't they so lucky that they had this experience, or they just had the right, everything came together at the right time. And so we look at change externally. We know someone's changed because of the external change that we have seen with our eyes. And he said, but that's missing the point, because that change that we see with our eyes has been happening inside that person for years. It just suddenly showed up externally. And so he gives himself as an example that he spent most of his life, he wanted to be a writer. He didn't know what he wanted to write. So he started in journalism just to keep him writing. Then an editor sat him down and said, you're a terrible writer. Just get away from this career. And he said he knew journalism was wrong for him, but he still felt like he was a writer, still didn't know what he was going to write. But he had this insatiable desire to learn about the world. So he started traveling the world, and he would take every odd job that he could in all these different countries, and he goes through a list of all these jobs that he had. Just odd jobs, just to survive as he's traveling the world. He just wanted experiences and experiences. And he's in his late 30s, and his parents are getting really worried about him because he seems really lost. And he said, I didn't feel lost. I was feeling this need that I had. And he said, and so then I was walking with this guy who was sort of in the publishing world, and he said, I need to get if you could write a book, what would it be? And he said, in that moment, in 5 minutes, this whole book poured out of me. And I didn't even know it was there. It was based on all these experiences that he had, and it was about power. He said, I read about Napoleon and Julius Caesar and all these wars, and then I look at all these little jobs, and I saw all the same dynamics happening in these little jobs, that people are playing these little power games, and he's been watching it. And he said, I wasn't spending all that time doing these jobs to write a book on power, but it just all, in that moment, everything came together. So it looks like one big transformational moment. He changed his life. He wrote this book, and it was hugely successful, apparently, and he's been doing very well ever since. And he said, but it wasn't just that moment. It was years of those small incremental changes. And so that's the other part that I really resonated with, is that this is not something, I think when we think about change, we think it's something that we have to see. I like that he said that we are always constantly comparing ourselves to other people who we've seen have changed, and we're wanting to see our own change, and we want to see it fast. Even in 6 months, where is the change? Where's it showing up in my life? Where are the big miracles in my life? I have a friend, she just was invited to speak about at a conference with 5,000 people. And Michael Beckwith will be speaking there as well. And she's speaking on her favorite topic, God and sex. She's been wanting to do this for the 30 years that I've known her. her dreams, and then another, and then she's has to, right after that, she's has to do a TV interview and a radio interview, and everything's just happening, and it seems like, oh man, her life is just a miracle, one big miracle. She has spent 30 years doing this work inside of herself, and she's written books that nobody has read, and she's done a ton of work that nobody has seen, all these little changes that she's been making and working on in her life that nobody saw, and now it feels like this big miracle. It didn't come out of nowhere. And so the question is what are we willing to do in our life to have that change happen, to have changes, and do we really want to change? Are we really invested in being a different person? And what I like about Robert Greene, what he said, because I see it in so many cases, is you're not doing it because you have to. You're doing it because you have this insatiable need. He had an insatiable need to learn about the world. He wasn't doing it to get he didn't know what he wanted. He didn't know, but he knew he had this need. So I did it from when I did spiritual practices. That came from a moment of total vulnerability, where I was at the lowest in my life, where I really didn't know why I wanted to be alive. And in that moment, I knew the one reason why I wanted to be alive was God. And I didn't even know what that meant. It wasn't like I was having these great experiences of God. In that moment, I wasn't even feeling God. I just knew it, that I could take everything else away, and I didn't feel like anything in my life mattered, but God did. And it is from that place of total vulnerability, of total sense of I have no power, that I made the commitment to do my 3 spiritual practices, and that was January of 1992. I started doing them regularly, and the key was, that's why I resonated with what Mel Robbins said, is when we don't feel like it. I was so clear that I had to do them whether I felt like it or not. The phrase I always used was no matter what. No matter how busy I was. There was no excuses. No matter how busy I was, no matter what was going on in relationships, no matter how I was physically feeling, no matter how I was emotionally feeling, I had to do them, because in that moment of total vulnerability, I knew that nothing else mattered to me but God, so I had to live my life that way. I had to live and say, all these other things are demanding my attention, but I know when it comes push to shove that none of those things really matter to me. It's God that matters to me, so no matter what else is going to happen, I'm going to do my daily spiritual practices. Now, I got some feedback, like within 3 months, some people were saying, oh, you've changed. And that was nice. I wasn't aware that I was changing. I was just focused on doing I was giving myself to the action. I made a decision, I was giving myself to the action. But it's still, I went on. I wasn't doing it for a goal. I wasn't doing it to get anything. I was doing it because I realized what really mattered to me. And that's why we go back to, do I really want to change? What really matters to us? So by the end of that year, I was working in a psychiatric hospital. I had known someone who worked in a psychiatric hospital, and I thought it was a weird job. Never thought about it for myself, and yet by the end of the year, I'm working in a psychiatric hospital and loving it. I can't believe how much I love my work. In January 1993, I take my first Science of Mind class at Celebration Center for Spiritual Living in Falls Church, Virginia. By the end of 1993, I'm still doing my spiritual practices. Nothing major happens when I do them. I just do them. Things aren't opening up, heavens aren't opening up. I'm just doing my practices because I decided this is what really matters. And by the end of 1993, I get the call to be a minister. It so doesn't resonate with me that I don't even resist it, because there's nothing to resist. I'm like, well, that's interesting. But I just keep saying yes. And so I keep doing the steps that it takes to move towards ministry, and then eventually it does start dawning on me what this means, and then I do come up with the resistance. I keep saying yes. I keep doing my spiritual practices. I never stop. I never give myself an excuse. 2002, which is exactly 9 years, so I took my first Science of Mind class in January of 1993. In 2002, I am the senior minister of the same church where I took my first class. 9 is the number of completion. Full circle. I'm the minister from right where I started. I didn't plan any of that. I wasn't on a goal. It was going to be like, oh, that's an amazing story. We all have those amazing stories. Every one of us, when we give ourselves to something that we really care about, everything starts to, as Robert Greene says, opportunity starts finding us. We don't find it. It starts coming to us. Those miracles of transformation, those miracles of change that you hear other people give, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. It's all that inner work. He said it's all that preparation that we're doing, but we're not doing it to get it. We're doing it because we actually love it. On a whole I love it. The other story of Rocky, not his name, not Rocky, was it Sylvester Stallone? I was going to say Rocky Stallone. He was another person. And I like it because he's so opposite of, I'm a minister, so of course I talk about my spiritual practices. He was in 8th grade, definitely a troublemaker, barely surviving grades, hated school, always not showing up, getting into fights with everybody. His teacher voted him the most likely to end up in jail. And what's interesting about something like that is it didn't make him feel good. I think sometimes when we look at sort of tough kids or tough people, that we think those things don't impact them. And somewhere between 8th and 9th grade, he discovered boxing. He loved boxing. He just found something that he loved. He found something that really mattered to him. So he started showing up and was boxing, and that was something that was worth showing up no matter whether he felt like it or not, because he found something that really mattered. And what happened was, from doing all that boxing, he started developing a sense of who he was, and he started doing better in school, and his relationships started getting better, and we all know his life just kept getting better and better. And we could say that was a miracle, but he committed himself to something that he really loved, no matter what. He showed up no matter what. And to me, that just continues to be the key. If we want to change takes time. It's not something that happens in 6 months, lasting change. We can do change that's quick, that happens in 6 months, but lasting change that we are going to live with, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes consistency, it takes us willing to show up whether we feel like it or not, over and over and over again, and it tells us what really matters to us. When you came here and I said, is there something that in your life you really want to change? Does it really matter to you? Is this something that you really want to change in your life? And what's lovely is that it isn't just about changing with ourselves. I also happened to watch a beautiful story, another video. YouTube is my new research tool. I just discovered it. I know you all have, but I'm new to it, so I'm having a great time. It's a beautiful story. Her name is Michelle. Oh, I wrote it down. I can't remember her name. Anyway, so I'll tell people at the announcements. She was raised in the Westboro Baptist Church. Y'all familiar with Westboro Baptist Church in Kansas? Very fundamentalist, angry group of people. She said at 5 years old, she said she was standing out there holding a sign. She didn't know what it said. And it said, gays deserve death. This is the Westboro Baptist Church philosophy. It's everybody's evil except for us, any Baptists. And it's angry, it's violent, and it's aggressive. And that's how she was raised. There was about 10 kids in her family, the Baptist church. She said, and I embraced it with zeal. I was so clear we were good, and everyone else was going to damnation, and we were in their face. I lived with my family a life of protest. We went to protests everywhere, fighting at people, telling them how they were evil, they were going to hell, and then she said, and then I carried it onto Twitter. And she said, and at first it had that same vicious violence that we loved at our protests. And I would spew out all that anger and violence. And she said, and at first I got back all the stuff I expected. She said, but then something started to happen. Sometimes people would respond to her, and they responded to her, she said, like I was a human being. And they said they clearly disagreed with me, but they would start asking me why I believed it, or they weren't attacking me back. They were just sort of inquiring. And there were many things that she said about this experience, was that it was important that they were questioning her beliefs, that they were beginning to poke holes that made her doubt. But the thing that made her doubt the most was their kindness. She said, I really believed everyone else was evil, and they weren't acting evil, and I couldn't reconcile that in my head. How could they be kind? They're bad. They're going to the devil. And so that started to change her and started to play around in her being. Well, what the people who are arguing with me on Twitter, we're still arguing, but now there's sort of a relationship being built here. And then she said, I'd go to the protests, and the people that I was arguing with would show up at the protests and start talking with me. And she said it was clear that we held different positions, So we were enemies in terms of our ideals, but there was a friendship that started to develop. So I had a sign that was, "I hate Jews," and one of the men who showed up wrote a blog called Jewalicious, and he brought her a Middle Eastern dinner, and she brought him her food, and they were exchanging food and yet fighting, and yet not fighting but disagreeing, and she said she was getting confused about her philosophy and feeling friendship, and the connection started to be built. And over time, she realized that what she believed was wrong, and she had to leave her family. Now, her family wasn't able to make those shifts that she was, so they would rather disown her rather than change. So she chose to leave with her sister, being disowned by her family, who she loved but disagreed with, couldn't be with anymore. And she said what amazed her was the kindness with which she was braced. That she said, "I have 20 years of history of all the violent things that I said. It's out there. There's nothing that all that anger and violence isn't hidden. And yet people chose to forgive me. People chose to show me kindness, and I couldn't wrap my head around how much kindness and forgiveness there was." And then she said that one of the Hasidic rabbis invited her and her sister to live with him and his daughters. And they would talk theology and eat meals together. And I think she ended up marrying the Jewalicious guy. And but this all happened over years. And it took patience and kindness. And she said, give someone the benefit of the doubt. And I thought, what an amazing thing. She writes, Jews deserve to go to heaven, and the person responds to her giving her the benefit of the doubt. When someone attacks you like that, the last thing you want to do is say, but I know deep down you have good intentions, while you're telling me I'm evil. And yet, she said they didn't ever give up their point of view, but they did it with kindness. What if we did that same change within ourselves? It's external and internal. We do it with kindness. We don't attack ourselves. That's why I don't like the word force. Well, Robbins uses the word force. We're not here to attack ourselves. We're not here to just say, you got to believe this, or why didn't you show up? You said you cared about this and you didn't make these changes. You said you were. That is not going to work for ourselves or for anyone else. It is patient, gentle, kind, and consistent. We stand for what we believe. Yes, I said I was going to make these changes and I didn't show up these certain days, but I still really believe this. So I'm going to show up today and do it, even though I didn't do it for the last several days. We do it for one another. This person hurts me. This person feels scary to me, but I'm going to show up day after day after day with my kindness. I'm going to show up with my care and my compassion and seeing the face of God on them, even though they can't see it. All they see in me is the devil. I choose to see the face of God. We do it for ourselves and we do it for each other. Do we really want change, or do we want to be right? Do we really want change? Growth happens when we're vulnerable and say we don't know everything. We don't know how to always change things, but I do know what really matters to me. So the question behind do you really want to change is what really matters to you. What really matters to you that you're willing to show up in your own life for yourself and in your relationship with other people, that you're willing to show up with day in and day out, to transform it to a greater expression of love, to transform it to a greater expression of creativity and of harmony. The last point I want to make is it doesn't mean we stop being vulnerable. It doesn't mean that we fix ourselves and we become perfect. What it means is those things no longer own us. I still have times where I feel like I'm not enough. I still have times where I'm deeply lonely. I still have times where I'm very sad. I haven't gotten rid of those parts of my life. In fact, my journaling process is to be open to those all of the time. But they don't own me. They are just a part of what I experience. They're a full part of my experience, and I don't want to fix them. They are an opening for me to keep my heart soft, to keep myself humble, to keep myself available, to always be willing to grow and learn. Those are a beautiful part of who I am. I don't think that of those vulnerable, weak spots of my life as not God. They are as essential to me, but also so is the joy. I also don't want to say that God only comes through pain and suffering. God comes when I'm playing and having a creative and joyful time. God comes through my work life. God comes through my relationships. God comes through all of it. But it includes those places where I don't feel strong. What I would say the difference is for myself is that because of the spiritual practices, it includes everything, and it includes everything fully, but I'm never limited to any of it. I'm not afraid when I feel lonely. I'm not afraid when I feel not enough that that's my identity. If that's the only thing I have going for me, then that's going to overwhelm me. My failures are going to overwhelm me. But if I know that's just a one color on a beautiful palette of who I am, of who we are, then we can feel it fully. I like that what Ken Wilber says, which is actually the more we wake up, the more deeply we actually feel things. The more when we cry harder. When we laugh with more freedom. We feel everything more because we know we are more than all of it. We can feel it to the fullness because we're not afraid of it being our identity. We tend to shut down when we're afraid, I'm going to always be not enough, or I'm always going to be lonely. But if we realize it's a part of who I am, then I can feel into it completely. So our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities do become this credible place that God goes through us, as well as our joy and our strength. So I want to really wanted to emphasize that growth is not about becoming perfect. And I'm using spirituality because we're in a church, but I love, I think of someone, I'm just using Sylvester Stallone because it seems so opposite of what I'm talking about, but it's not. By his strength in boxing, by his love of that, he started to develop an ability to show up in every other area of his life. That when we show up for ourselves about what really matters, it ends up impacting every other area of our life. It's not just that one area. It impacts everything. Our relationships, our finances, and we're never overwhelmed. No, we get overwhelmed, but we're not even overwhelmed when we're overwhelmed. Does that make sense? We're not even overwhelmed. What do you really want to change in your life? What really matters to you? What really matters to you that you're willing to take action on? What really matters to you that you're willing to take action on and show up no matter how you feel, no matter what else is going on in your life? What change do you want to make that you're willing to do day in and day out, not only for month after month, but year after year? What really matters? Do you really want to change? And when I get to that place, what I get in touch with, this is what it is. This is what it is. It's the yes. For me, that's the spiritual practices. It's a yes to what really matters is God. For Sylvester Stallone, it may be boxing, but there's a yes. We get in touch with that yes inside of us. That yes that includes everything but transcends everything. So when we get to that yes, do I really want to change? What really matters to me? Yes. And that yes has action to it. Yet that yes has a no matter what. That yes is there day in and day out, year after year. That yes is life itself. That's the yes.